Okay, perfect. Okay. Welcome for our Jupiter in Leo, all 12 signs update. I'm super excited to do this one with you guys because this particular um, live event, I'm going to get into a little bit more nuance. It's not an excessive amount of nuance, but nuance in the interpretation of Jupiter because I see in the arena of sort of like pop astrology, Jupiter's really um, spoken about as an energy of luck, of abundance and prosperity, and this sort of thing. And I have just seen in my personal lived experience that Jupiter can be that, but is not always that, especially when we start to look at Jupiter like in combination with other planetary energies. And we're going to talk about some of that today in a way I don't normally talk about when I talk about a planet changing signs because of the nature of what Jupiter is in our solar system and the way Jupiter operates in our solar system. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a richer, more complex, more nuanced understanding today so that you can really start to think about for yourself how you want to utilize this energy in your chart because you're probably already experiencing the impact of Jupiter in Leo. Okay. So let's kind of start with a little bit of who the heck is this Jupiter? I'm not going to go as in depth as I did with Juno, only because Jupiter is a very familiar energy in the mythology and the zodiac. So orienting you to Jupiter isn't necessarily something I know I need to do a whole lot of. In the ancient Roman mythology, Jupiter, who you'll also see talked about as Jove if you're digging into the mythology, is the king of the gods and the supreme deity of the pantheon. And he got there in an interesting way. He overthrew his father, which we'll talk about in a second, as the god of the sky, thunder, and justice. He represents the Roman state. He was the governor and the arbiter of law and social order. And he's the Roman sort of uh, superimposed identity on the Greek, who was Zeus. So here's the deal. He's the son of the Titans, Saturn and Ops. The Titans were Gaia's original children. So now you can start to see a bit of a lineage. You've heard me talk about Gaia being the earth, the first original of the divine counterparts. Her counterpart was Ouranos. She self-birthed through parthenogenesis, her own children, the Titans. Saturn was one of them, Ops was another. And Jupiter was hidden at birth to avoid being swallowed by his father due to a prophecy that Saturn was given about, one of his sons overthrowing him and killing him. And so Jupiter was hidden by his mother in order to avoid said prophecy. His mother intervened. However, the prophecy came to pass, and Jupiter later overthrew Saturn, defeated the Titans, and became the Lord of the cosmos. After this overthrow, Jupiter and his brothers decided between themselves how they were going to divide up the known world. And Jupiter took the skies or the heavens. Neptune took the seas, the oceans, rivers, lakes, etc. And then Pluto took the underworld, the everything that's below the earth. And so this is how we have the three of them governing these three domains of mythological world. And so he was worshipped as the center. And His worship was centered in a temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on Rome's Capitoline Hill, where he was revered alongside his sister wife, Juno, and daughter Minerva. So that's, the sister wife part, they were a little incestuous back in the day. And there on the right, you can see a picture of Juno and Jupiter. I chose this one in particular because when I talked about Juno first, I chose a picture of both of them. They are known to be equal halves of rulership on Mount Olympus. And I didn't want to portray him in this conversation without her as if he is some type of standalone and she is not. We see one of his symbols there. We see the eagle in the back over his shoulder and behind his head. We see one of her symbols there from the mythology on the lower right, the peacock. And we see that there is a balance between them in many ways in their power. This piece of art is brought to us by Scottish neoclassical history painter Gavin Hamilton, and from the 1700s, and just provides this really beautiful imagery of their sort of potency and power and fecundity and fertility. We see also that Jupiter's role in the Roman world extended largely beyond that of a mythological figure. He was really intertwined with the state's existence and moral fabric, very much like Juno was. He was represented with the scepter, the eagle, and the thunderbolt. Those were his symbols. The sacred tree is the oak. We also see, just like Juno, because he is the sky god, Romans really believed, he witnessed oaths and treaties, and when mortal promises and oaths between the gods were made, Juno and Jupiter witnessed these. Um, Swearing a false oath in either one of their names was considered to be very taboo and have severe consequences. He was also known as the giver of victory through titles like Jupiter Imperator, Jupiter Triumphator, and he was credited with Roman military success, and victorious generals would offer sacrifices to his temple, very much like Juno at the beginning of wars. She was honored for her protection, her guidance, and her leadership, her wisdom. While many of Jupiter's stories are adapted directly from the myths of Greek Zeus, this is what happens with colonialism. One religion superimposes itself on another. The Romans adopted from the Greeks, who adopted from the Egyptians, who then adopted from Sumeria, Babylonia. We see a long history of superimposition going on here. Christians did many of the same things once Christianity became the adopted religion with the pagan uh, sort of figures. We call them pagan in Christianity, but they were just pre-existing religious popular conversation at that time. We get that superimposition. Um, but there's heavy Roman adaptation in this as well. So he enforced the cosmic order. Um, Oaths sworn on the Jupiter lapis, the Jupiter stone on Capitoline Hill, were considered the most solemn promises a Roman could make. In the Ennead, in Roman literature, he acts as a paternal protector who guides the hero Aeneas, ensuring the fulfillment of destiny and the eventual founding of Rome. One of the most prolific sort of side stories about Jupiter that you'll hear about quite often in the mythology is how lustful and prodigious Jupiter was in spreading his seed specifically through the act of rape. And it's not talked about as rape, but I feel like it is important to name it as such because many times in the mythology, we absolutely see um, conniving, cunning. We see manipulation in the act on Jupiter's part to attempt to have sex with someone who may have otherwise declined or said no. And so in the stories, we see him shapeshift, he becomes a horse, he becomes other shapes, other figures in order to tempt or have sex or maneuver or manipulate nymphs, other goddesses, humans, um, because it's just part of his will to spread his seed. And I do really believe that this is sort of where we have pulled much of the um, foregone conclusion that we have in modern culture and conversation that, men are just supposed to spread their seed. They have that they're non-monogamous. They just want to, they're programmed to have sex anytime, anywhere. I don't know that that's actually true, but I certainly can see in the narrative mythology, if we look at Zeus and then Jupiter, et cetera, down the line, we get this justification from mythological god characters for this sort of behavior. And so, and infidelity. So this is sort of where we get this from. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Jupiter movement. Let's contextualize it a bit more into present time astrology. As the gaseous planet, the largest planet in our solar system, it it's interesting because its movement is faster than the outer planets. It's more expansive and technically in volume size bigger than any of the other planets in our solar system. Its transit time is approximately a year, and it's known as what as astrologers call like we as astrologers call a transpersonal planet. It is a bridge planet. And so it sits in the astrology in between Earth. These are all of the personal planets. They move very quickly. And then we have Jupiter and Saturn, which sit right in the middle. And then we have Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron. Okay. And so with Jupiter right in the middle, smack dab in the middle of this, it's known as this bridge between the personal and the generational planets. As such, as the biggest one in our solar system, the most gaseous one, it expands, it amplifies, it proliferates and multiplies. And this is really where we see the mythology and the astronomy overlap with this relationship between its gaseousness, its bigness, and then Zeus, Jupiter's infidelity, seed spreading, etc. Okay, so there's that piece. There are planets that in the astrology are more impactful despite its size. There are planets more impactful than Jupiter. And so I want you guys to understand this as you're starting to really dig into the astrology for yourself and in more personal ways. A Jupiter transit in your chart, yes, brings expansion, amplification, proliferation, and multiplication. However, A Saturn transit, Uranus transit, Neptune, Pluto, and Chiron transit are going to be weightier. They're going to be more impactful. And the reason why we as astrologers believe this is because the distance from the sun dictates impacted weight on a person's chart in terms of transit. And so Saturn sits one planet away from Jupiter. Uranus is two, Neptune three, Pluto being the most impactful, and Chiron being a centaur and not fully at planetary status, sits right where Uranus sits. It's very similar to Uranus in transit time, 7 years, 8 years. So, with that being said, many times people are looking for a Jupiter transit to bring expansion to a house, a planet, a sign, opportunity to a house, a planet, a sign. However, if a Saturn transit, a Uranus transit, a Neptune, or a Pluto transit are also happening for the governor of that house or the same planet or impacting a sign that Jupiter is also impacting, you will find that the Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto transit dominate. All planets are not equal. And so interpreting them as equal is actually going to create a lot of confusion in your interpretations. It's important to understand that some planets have more impact than others. The further away from the sun you go, the more impactful the planetary conversation is, the longer that planetary conversation is, with the longest one in our solar system being Pluto. Pluto having just entered a new sign, that's Aquarius. It's going to be there for 20 years, whereas Jupiter's transit through Leo, the opposing sign, is only going to be 1 year. Okay. In fact, before close of play of this Pluto transit, Jupiter will catch up and meet Pluto in Aquarius. In many ways, undoing much of what we're about to see happen during the Jupiter and Pluto years if it doesn't align with the Pluto imperative of power being given to people, power being operating in technology. Jupiter will come along and pull up alongside Pluto in Aquarius and then facilitate expansion of Pluto's work in Aquarius. Okay. So, little interesting astrological tidbit for those of you who are students of astrology and really trying to understand how all of this works. Those inner planets, again, the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Earth, these planets are changing signs every 30 to 40 days. The moon every 48 hours. And so these inner planets, they are not changing our lives, but Jupiter will change those planets. So too will Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Chiron will change those planets. But those planets will not change Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto because these ones are further away from the sun. Every degree out from the sun you go, the more impact, the more weight, the more dominating a planet is. So I wanted to make sure that I explain that here with this transpersonal planet so that as you're expecting what Jupiter may bring to Leo in your personal chart, you have an awareness and understanding of why things may be going in ways other than what you may have anticipated, because these other planets are having a more important conversation at this time. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about what Jupiter represents. As I mentioned, expansion, growth, abundance, repeated opportunity, potential, and possibility. In the light, we get luck, we get fortune, optimism, faith, and hope. But in the shadow, we get gluttony, overindulgence, overreach. We get inflation. We get a flooding of sorts, overwhelmment. Okay. And so Jupiter is going to expand whatever he touches. And if whatever's going on in your house that Leo represents is not something that is working for you, it will expand in present time so that you can see it, name it, change it. If whatever's going on in the house that Jupiter represents is working for you, it will expand so that you can see it, name it, and capitalize on it so that it can grow. Okay. So I wanted to make sure that I provided that nuance to this conversation. I've read on forums and met people personally. Jupiter transits their seventh house of marriage and they don't get married and they're frustrated and can't figure out why. It's because, or they get divorced and they can't figure out why. It is because, number one, there are other planets that are more impactful having a conversation. And number two, Jupiter will expand. It won't turn it into something it's not. It will expand what it is. And so, if in your seventh house there's strife in your marriage, there's complication in your marriage, there's anger problems in your marriage or between you and your partner, if that partnership is problematic, it will expand so that you deal with it, either by getting help, therapy, support, coaching, or you end it because it wasn't aligned for you to begin with. Okay. So it's important to understand Jupiter has neutrality, and those are the first five bullet points. All planets do. But then Jupiter also has light and shadow as well. Let's talk about Leo. So Leo represents children, the inner child, creativity and creative power, the generative power. Again, most of this mythology comes to us out of the northern hemisphere as opposed to the southern hemisphere in the way the world is presently divided and viewed. The northern hemisphere, Leo season is a season of fecundity, of growth, of a lot of abundance, of the harvest coming into full ripeness before it's harvested. Okay. We get sovereignty, power, authority. We also get healthy ego with Leo. Illumination, visibility, and warmth. Leadership, it is known as the sign of the king or the sovereign. In the light, we get a concern for self that encourages other to do the same, a taking care of self and one's own needs. We get the ability to stand up for self, the ability to be present, creative, and even provisionary. Really good sovereigns, kings and queens in antiquary times and antiquity actually were known as being great kings and queens because of the way they provided for their people, took care of their people, made sure their people were safe. And so, in this regard, in the light, Leo is one of the most generous signs of the zodiac. And those of you who have Leo sun, moon, rising, and stelliums, you may also find that one of your greatest faults at times is you can give beyond the place where either other people can receive, you can overstep their giving. Likewise, you may also find that people don't always give back to you in the same way. And it's because they're not Leos. Taurus and Cancer being similar, very generous signs from earth and water. Gemini in the air sign. In shadow, or Aquarius in air, sorry, not Gemini, Aquarius. In shadow, we get a selfishness. We get an egocentricness. We get a stubbornness, an inability to change. We also get a bit of recognition of status, like, and it can come off as holier than thou to other people. But it's just this sort of leonine tendency to recognize itself as a sovereign, but it can come off as quite holier than thou. Um, Leo can be overly self-protective. This is me and mine and my space and my stuff. It can also become quite performative or attention hungry or dramatic. It can overblow things out of proportion. And that's Leonine tendencies in shadow. The difference between neutrality, light, and shadow is choice, my friends. I've said this so many times. So, now I want to take a look at some of the things that we might experience. I want to get into predictions, then I want to get into dates, and then we're going to have some discussion and we're going to do all 12 signs. So some predictions, expansion of existing and new creative projects and whatever house this is in for you personally, you can look for it there. But when we look at this collectively, I anticipate this being a year that's very creative for arts and artists, where if they are wanting to birth something new, we're going to see it during the Jupiter in Leo year. We also get a little bit of refinement because Saturn is also in a fire sign Aries. And so this refinement in Aries and this expansion of Jupiter in Leo, we can see a lot of new things, personally authentic things coming into the mix. We get an expansion of conversation about inner child and childhood experiences with Jupiter and Leo. I think we're going to see a lot of coaches and psychotherapists, in particular concerning men, and the redefinition of male identity that is underway in present time. I think we're going to see a
You cut out, Kay.
structures, providing new maps, new guideposts, new containers, new conversations for the way we nurture male consciousness in the childhood and early childhood years. I also think we're going to see a lot more male therapists and men on the cutting edge of this conversation begin to talk about formative childhood experiences and their impact on the way they grew into current conversations of masculinity and what they'd like to change about that. I also believe we're going to see attempts at deepened paternalism, authoritarianism, fascism across governments worldwide. I don't believe that's going to stop. I actually think that's going to ramp up and pick up. And as those governments continue to attempt to expand their own authority over their own people, I think we're also going to see clashes between them as they jockey for authority outside of their boundaried countries. I think we're going to continue to see jockeying over um, resources in the Congo, continue to see jockeying over resources in the Amazon. Of course, the material resources that come from the earth itself. I think we're going to continue to see lots of jockeying in position of governments that are already in that place, trying to own more, take more than what's already theirs. And thank God Jupiter will only be in Leo for 1 year. This is where we can be grateful for a shorter transit. Um, I also believe we're going to see more people choosing to be single, getting divorced, finding ways to operate as individuals or sovereign unto themselves rather than as a unit, a pair, or a we. I think we're also going to see people um, in units and pairs work to find their individual self, individual voice, authentic movement in the third dimension as this happens. And so people may stay pair bonded, but uncouple the way they live, like being married but living apart, being married but uncoupling their business partnership and alliance, being in business partnership but uncoupling the roles and the duties so there's less overlap and everyone has clarity about their valued individual contributions. So yeah, business partnerships breaking into separately owned factions or greater delineation around who owns what task, what creative task, who brings what to the table. So there's not duplication of work, there's not stepping on toes. And with that regard, because we see an aspect from Uranus in Gemini, and Pluto in Aquarius, Uranus, the planet, and Aquarius, the sign being all about technology, I also really believe we're going to see greater, um, how do we say, sort of like a spinning out is what my guides have shown me of like where there's not just duplication of work among the humans, but duplication of work among like the artificial intelligence, this sort of thing. I think we're going to see companies really start to tease out cost savings and work in creative ways so they where humans need to be, humans are going to be, and where AI can handle a thing, AI will handle a thing. I think we're going to see a bit more of a right sizing concerning what can a human do, what can artificial intelligence do, which I think it's heartening knowing that, AI won't take over everything this year, but I do believe people are going to get more fine-toothed combed about exactly what can AI do, and really start to continue to release people from those roles so that there's, greater cost savings because I do believe with Jupiter in Leo, for some countries, inflation really is going to skyrocket. It's going to soar, depending upon, the sign the sun sits in for that country. Unfortunately, if you're in the United States, I do believe we're going to see even worse inflation over the course of this year. Um, and then I think as Jupiter moves out of Leo and into Virgo, there's some things are going to stabilize economically. But if your country celebrates its Independence Day or its anniversary um, during the month of or during the astrological season of Cancer, Jupiter in Leo will facilitate a bit of inflation for on goods for your country, unfortunately. So I do believe that will happen, but I also think that's why people are going to start to get more meticulous, and businesses will get more meticulous about what can AI do and what do we actually need a human to do because it costs us more to let AI do it than to just let a human do it. So I think we're going to see a bit more of a fine-tooth comb with this and certain jobs starting to get certain protections concerning the takeover of artificial intelligence. And then lastly, I believe we're about to see a lot more individualism. Overall, more people opting to find their own way, shore up their own resources, solidify their own identity, do their own thing across relationships, family, friendships, colleagueships, business partnerships, marriages, etc., etc., etc. These are years when we tend to see people looking for more personalized self-expression, and this is only heightened because in the other sign of individuation, and that's Aries, we see Saturn aspecting Jupiter over the course of Jupiter's transit here. So lots of individuation and individualism is on the docket for this 1 year transit. So before we go further, I want to go into something very different here. I want to talk about um, some of your personal experiences with Jupiter in Leo. Normally, at this point in the conversation, I would pull Jupiter in Leo historically. You've seen me do that with Uranus. You've seen me do that with Neptune and Saturn. You saw me do that with Pluto. As they all moved into their new signs, I would talk to you historically. This is what we've seen. However, as one of these bridge planets, these transpersonal planets, I want to pause here and say, let's look at this in a more individual light. And the reason why is because with Jupiter in Leo, the 1 year transit would have been colored by changes unfolding with those outer planets, as I've mentioned. The outer planets would have been significantly more impactful, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and yes, Chiron, not officially recognized as a planet, but a heavyweight in and of himself. They would have been more impactful than just Jupiter in Leo. So I want to contextual, since this is going to be very personal anyway, this transit for all of us, I want to go ahead and open up the floor to some conversation about Jupiter in Leo and what you've personally experienced during these dates. We would have been, July to roughly June 2014 to 2015. What was going on in your life? You can also look back to August 2002, roughly August, September 2003. What was going on in your life then? And then for those of you old enough to have been alive, August 1990 through roughly July, August 1991. What was going on in your life then? I want you to put your hand up. We're going to have some open dialogue about this. The dialogue will be closed and exclusive to those of you in Star Club. But if you're catching this segment over on the YouTube channel, I'd love for you to drop in the comments. What was it that you experienced during these periods of time? There may have been other planets in play, so just keep that in mind. But you could see a potential, not guaranteed, repeat of some of those themes based on the fact that Jupiter will arrive now to the same place in your chart as it would have been during this period of time. So we're going to go ahead and have that conversation in Star Club. Now, if you're on YouTube, it'll have been edited out, but feel free to drop in the comments below what you're seeing.